My brothers and sisters, may the Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. John was standing with two of his disciples, and as he watched Jesus walk by, he said, "Behold the Lamb of God." The two disciples heard what he said and followed Jesus. Jesus turned and saw them following him and said to them, "What are you looking for?" They said to him, "Rabbi," which translated means teacher, "where are you staying?" He said to them, "Come and you will see." So they went and saw where he was staying, and they stayed with him that day. It was about 4 p.m. Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, was one of the two who heard John and followed Jesus. He first found his own brother Simon and told him, "We've found the Messiah," which is translated Christ. And then he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, the son of John. You will be called Cephas," which is translated Peter. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Yesterday and today we've been listening to the recounting according to John of the place and significance of John the Baptist and his relationship with Jesus. And yesterday, as you recall specifically, John recognizes that Jesus is the one who comes after him. And he's in all humility, says as well that he's been only the preparer for what happens. And today that same segment continues as two of the disciples of John see Jesus and in turn leave John the Baptist and now follow Jesus. And one of them, interestingly, is the brother of Peter. And so he comes back to his brother Peter and says, "We found the Messiah." And at this point, according to John's account, the relationship begins between Peter and Jesus. In a sense, it makes more sense out of some of the things we see in the synoptic accounts when we see this particular segment with regard to how the relationship with Peter began with Jesus. Because if you recall, for example, in Luke's account, at one point he's mending his nets and Jesus comes down to the shore and he says, "Take me out into the boat so I can speak to them." And if he had not had any kind of relationship with them at all, he could have just very quickly said, "I've got work to do. I don't have time to be sitting out in the boat with you." And a couple other times in the synoptic accounts, there's like a progression as Peter is called by Jesus to take another step, go deeper into the water. And in one instance, of course, he says, "Put your nets out." And Peter's quick to say, "I've been doing it all day. There's no fish to be caught. But since you've told me to do it, I will do it." And so there's kind of a gradual kind of conversion experience whereby Peter's able to move beyond his own supposed expertise and out of trust be open and willing to accept what Jesus suggests one must do. And of course, this will mark the entire life of Peter as he ends up becoming stronger and stronger in his relationship. It's also interesting that this encounter of Peter with John, with Jesus rather, comes about as a result of the invitation of his brother. And again, he could have just said, "No, I've got other things to do. I'm not going to go and see who this is." But he takes the invitation on. And all those little images are reminders to the church, both in the beginnings of its time and for us, that essentially the same thing happens. Sometimes God comes, he offers an invitation, he leaves it up to us to say yes or no. And more often than not, there's somebody else who's in the picture who's either encourages us or kind of helps us to take the step. And that way we have to do all the time in our own journeys with the Lord, to recognize his presence when he is near, and having recognized it, to make the steps in our own life to say yes and to let go of the things that sometimes are the obstacles for us moving further out into the deep with him. In these final days then of Christmas, as we draw closer to Epiphany, we're reminded how the invitation that began so long ago continues to be offered. This time, however, it offered not to those first disciples, but it's offered to you and to me.